In this video I'm going to talk about how you can perform ground clearance assessments using LineSmarts. There are a few steps that you need to go through before performing your ground clearance measurements. First of all, you need to take the photo of the span that you want to measure, and you need to go through your span info page, define where your structures are and the distances to those structures and so forth. Then other things that you need to do is you need to identify the ground profile, as we see here, and also the catenaries. With the catenaries, it's important, if we look at this one here, for example, we see that we've got the offset of the attachments. You need to have those right to get the ground clearance assessments correct. Those steps, defining the profile and the catenaries, those are covered in other tutorials, so you can look at those if you haven't done already. Once you've done those things, then you can go to ground clearances here. On the ground clearances screen, it's all fairly simple. It's automatically calculated everything for you as soon as you open it. We do, however, have a few controls that we can adjust to get the information we'd like to know about. So the first of these is measurement position, and that defines where in the span that you're measuring the ground clearance. So currently it's set at minimum, and the minimum is the place in the span where the wire is closest to the ground. The other alternative that we've got is we can select manual, and that allows you to choose where in the span you'd like to measure. So for example, if we click on this image, we can now select any place in the span and it will measure the ground clearance at that point if we go back. Now once you've performed that measurement, that ground clearance is actually reported down here. So we see the ground clearance. Also a whole lot of other things are reported. For example, the type of conductor that it's measuring to, the governing load case that's causing that minimum clearance, the actual ground clearance, which we've already mentioned, the sag at that point, the vertical sag and the horizontal sag broken down. So this would be useful in the case that perhaps you've got a conductor that's being blown by the wind. And so the sag is a three-dimensional sag, and the vertical and the horizontal are the components in the vertical and horizontal dimensions of that sag. And then finally down the bottom here we've got the distance to the left pole and distance to the right pole in the plane of the span from the point where we're measuring the ground clearance height. So we can adjust this minimum in manual. So if we look here, we'll see that the ground clearance is 7.2 meters. If we go to minimum, and it looks in the center of the span, and it's 6.3 meters. The other thing that we can choose is which wire we'd like to measure to. So as default, it looks amongst all the wires and tries to find which of them are closest to the ground, but we could select a specific conductor and it will provide you with the measurement for that conductor. And the final control that we've got is to measure the clearance for a specific load case. By default, it's looking at the minimum clearance, so searching amongst all the different load cases to find which one provides the least ground clearance and reports that. However, we could select a specific ground clearance. For example, we might want to know what it is at the surveyed condition. And so here we can see when we select that, it gets rid of that governing load case and it tells us exactly what the ground clearance is at the surveyed position, so when you go and take the measurement. And again, all those other details, the sag, vertical sag, and distance to poles. So that's really how you measure ground clearance. The other thing to note is that ground clearance is to the ground profile line. When you've got conductors that are offset from the side of the pole, it's just measuring the vertical height from the elevation of the ground profile at that position in the span to the vertical height of that conductor. It's not measuring a three-dimensional dimension. And this would also mean that if you have a span where there's a lot of side slope, the ground clearances may be non-conservative. So this will be most accurate where the ground is relatively level.